A new technology can change our lives in profound ways, and artificial intelligence is no exception. But as AI becomes more ubiquitous, especially in the workplace, will its impact be more innovative or disruptive?
Ultimately, for our children and their children and generations yet unimagined, I think that AI is going to be a huge benefit.
On this episode, we explore how AI in the world of work, if properly leveraged, could actually be a huge accelerator for human productivity and flourishing. You're listening to Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week we're talking again about artificial intelligence. We've kind of been doing sort of an unofficial mini-series on the topic, exploring AI through a couple of different policy lenses that we're going to continue this week with our special guest, Brent Orrell. He's a senior fellow for the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on issues like workforce development, job training, also a lot of focus on sort of disconnected or disengaged populations in the world of work, and does some phenomenal work in this space and a lot of writing recently on artificial intelligence. So Brent, welcome to Defending Ideas.
I am so happy to be here to defend ideas. That's what we do at AEI. So thanks for having me.
No, we're appreciative of your time and your work in the space, and you're also very familiar with podcasting. Obviously, AEI scholars often do this kind of thing. You've also hosted a podcast yourself for AEI, Hardly Working. Just a lot of great multimedia and work, again, in the space of work and workforce development.
Yeah, I so enjoyed the several years that I put into that podcast. Had the opportunity to interview some really interesting people writing on topics related to work and vocation and understanding the importance of career as it relates to the rest of life. And we're not recording any more episodes, but they're all resident on the AEI website if anybody wants to go and listen. There's some really good stuff there.
And Brent, I think that was actually the first time in recent years that I started to kind of get to know you was through your Hardly Working podcast and following your other work, and have just enjoyed, again, following everything you're doing and AEI is doing and in this critical issue area of, broadly speaking, of work and opportunity and upward mobility. Because really, in my view, workforce development policy and programs that can kind of maybe sound a little dry to some folks, broadly speaking, are really essential because it's part of how we help more and more of our fellow Americans connect to work and opportunity that leads to upward mobility. So I wanted to talk to you about artificial intelligence specifically because you've been writing a lot recently about AI and its intersection with work and with the workplace and workforce development, and would love to kind of get your perspective on some of the big questions around AI right now. In particular, that there's kind of this looming question of, well, is AI going to replace me? Is it going to take my job? Or is it going to be an asset to help me be better at my job? And I'd love to start off by, what are your broad, big picture thoughts on AI and its impact on work?
So I think the answer to that question is, first of all, it's unknown. And we have to recognize that we are living in a period of great uncertainty. Probably more uncertainty than we've experienced in terms of the future of work, I think, in decades, possibly a century, in terms of the arrival on the scene of a technology called a general purpose technology that has the potential to fundamentally rewire the entire economy. When that happens, when that has happened in the past, as with electricity, steam engines, you name it, going all the way back to the looms in the United Kingdom. When that happens, there is disruption. It's going to, I believe this technology is, in the long run, going to be an enormous benefit to us. I think in the short and medium run, There's going to be a significant amount of turbulence, and we need to really think hard and be prepared to act to help workers make this transition to an AI-infused economy. So I don't want to blow sunshine up on anybody. I do think that there are going to be disruptions, but whatever those disruptions are, they're not nearly as consequential as what would happen if we tried to stop the deployment of AI and attempt to sort of build a wall around our existing economy. That's the only way, that you could potentially try to stop this, and we would be, shooting ourselves in the foot by taking that kind of a strategy. So, yes, there's going to be pain. We need good policy responses to those challenges, and but that ultimately, for our children and their children and generations yet unimagined, I think that AI is going to be a huge benefit.
Brent, I like the kind of the approach of you're clear-eyed about the fact that yeah, anytime there's disruption, there it obviously can be disruptive in some sectors of the economy, maybe in some of its impacts, but the long view is that this is going to be a net positive. And the analogy that I think of a lot, just because also kind of happening in my lifetime, is what I sense, and would love your thoughts on this, but what I sense is that where we are with AI today is kind of like where society was with respect to the internet in its early years. And even thinking of, I don't know, the early 90s maybe, of as things were developing and the internet was becoming more and more prevalent in the ensuing years throughout various aspects of life, to where now basically every or almost every area of commerce, of the economy, of just daily life involves internet-connected devices, and of course now smartphones and tablets and all this kind of stuff. So it kind of seems like when we look back now at the early advent of that technology, that there was a lot of uncertainty and disruption, and then fast forward to today, and yes, there are some negative impacts we talk a lot about in terms of, online content and social media, especially impact on kids, but there's also tremendous benefit to the economy and to modern life because of these devices we have in our pockets that can do tremendous things. So is that a fair analogy? Is it kind of like, yes, there's uncertainty, but the future is actually really exciting if we approach it the right way?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you go back and listen to some of the commentary that was made during the transition to the internet, when it was just like this kind of thing that was still not really present in everybody's life. I mean, I remember it clearly as we didn't have it at work, and then all of a sudden we did have it, and it completely transformed the way that we did our work because of the opportunity that it presents for instantaneous communication. That was a huge shift. And when you listen to people talk about it from that period, there's a lot of, human beings have this built-in negativity bias. We're much more afraid of what we might lose than we are hopeful about what we might gain. And that self-protective response to technological change is something that just colors our attitudes toward all types of new technology. I mean, they said it about television, they said it about the radio, they said it, the telegraph actually was quite controversial when it first made itself felt in American life. So it's not unusual that we would see this kind of response. And it is quite similar to what we saw around the emergence of the internet. I will say AI is much bigger than the internet because it's not just speeding up communication and connecting people. It is augmenting the human brain, enabling us to do more and enabling us to create more. and taking on a bunch of tasks that, much like we saw with other episodes of automation, it's going to be taking on a lot of routine tasks that I'm not so sure that people always want to be doing. It's we have a nostalgia in this country about manufacturing jobs, which I think is very misplaced, because manufacturing jobs were so difficult and wearing on people. And the transition to the information and knowledge economy has been a boon across the board for American society. But you see the transition problems I was referring to before. Some communities did not make the transition. So it's complex. There are challenges, and I'm still of the view that even though we are programmed, I think, to be skeptical and fearful, we need to overcome that and just accept that this is the future and get on board. It doesn't do any good to complain about it.
And I think that the way to do that matters. As some of what you've written, you've articulated this, some of the other conversations, again, when we've had conversations about AI in other policy areas, and we'll have some additional episodes coming out in the future on kind of this intersection of AI touching on, in the past, we've talked about elections, we're talking about work and workforce today, but sort of this question of what is the right way to approach this emerging technology? To your point, we can't, and from a human progress and flourishing standpoint, we shouldn't just say, no, stop it, kill it. But the way we approach it matters, and kind of that balance of, use the term integration. And I want to read a brief excerpt from a piece that you wrote for the AEI blog on this issue that's kind of, addressing this fear.
There's nothing more daunting than having yourself quoted back to you. So go ahead, hit me with what I said.
Well, hopefully you hear it and say, I agree still, because otherwise, if you want to argue with yourself, we'll see. But this is a piece that you wrote, and we'll include the link in our show notes for the AEI blog, where you write, contrary to popular fears, firms are looking for people to integrate AI tools into jobs that already exist, as opposed to hiring for standalone AI-focused roles. This means that, for the time being, AI is being implemented for augmentation as opposed to automation, and that hiring AI-literate employees does not usually come at the cost of those already employed. Nonetheless, if workers want to remain competitive in an increasingly AI-dependent economy, it'll be crucial for incumbent workers to become AI literate. Brent, can you expand on that? It really seems to speak to this. There's a balance, there's an integration question.
Right.
What do you make of that?
I mean, I do think that some of the biggest gains that we'll get out of AI are not uses of the technology that replace human labor, as much as what we're going to get out of it through augmentation, and helping people to do their jobs better, faster. Because they're working faster, they're able to do more. That's real productivity improvement, and we can't get improvement in our incomes and wages and wealth unless we can figure out a way to boost what has been a pretty stagnant productivity rate. So that's why we really need to do it. But going to the other side of the ledger, it presents a lot of challenges to workers. I'm frequently asked, particularly by young people who are finishing up their education and thinking about jobs and careers, and they've got an idea of something they want to do, and then they look at AI and ask whether the AI is going to remove that opportunity. And first of all, when you're very young, you never know what you're going to end up doing. I certainly never imagined that I would have the career that I've had. I mean, it was not on my scope. I've had a very wonderful career, and I think that So first of all, people need to stop worrying. Younger people need to stop worrying about the future so much, because I think, as I say to students, it's like, how many of you are actually worried about not having a place to live and not having enough to eat in the future? And the answer is zero. Nobody believes that that's in their future, because we are such a prosperous society. We have a very strong safety net to protect people. So we can take that off the table and then ask a different set of questions about, what does AI mean for the thing that I am most interested in? How can I use it to amplify, to accelerate my work in an area that I'm really interested in? And then I say, once you have identified that, you need to take responsibility for learning how to use the technology. No one can do that for you. We can't sit people in a classroom and train them in everything that they need to know about how to use artificial intelligence. It's really something that people have to take on for themselves. So I really encourage people, spend the $20 a month, get on ChatGPT. There are a bunch of other really interesting tools out there, image generation, all sorts of things, and take responsibility for learning this. You're going to have to do it. It's not an option not to, almost regardless of the field that you go into.
Brent, that was actually something I was curious about as you're talking, that one of the questions on my mind, honestly, for me personally, as well as just the broader landscape of this issue, is how to leverage it. Because I know I feel this way, and I assume that many in our audience feel the same, that AI is very exciting. I feel that, that we're on the cusp of something that's going to be transformative for society. And I know there are ways that I could better leverage AI in my work, in my life, to help me be more productive and kind of do my job better than I do now. But I'm not always sure where to start. And so what advice would you give for folks if they kind of have the sense of like, Brent, I get it, but like, how do I do it?
Yeah, you're going to love this, and so is your audience, I think. What I would do is I would write up what it is that you do. What are some of the things that you do in your life, either personally or professionally? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What do you do in your work? What kinds of tasks does that involve? And ask AI, how can you help me do what I do better? It will be happy to oblige and provide you with at least some ideas to consider about how to get more out of your work day, and how to take advantage of the incredible, amazing resources that can be just dropped into your lap by a technology that has access to everything every human being has ever done, thought, or said, and a comprehensive knowledge of the world. That is putting the human brain on steroids. It's already a very powerful organ, right? It's an amazing thing in and of itself, but we're talking about dramatically, exponentially increasing our capacities through AI. So that's where I would start. If you don't know where to start, ask the AI, describe what you do, and ask it, how can AI help me do this better?
That's really interesting. It's almost kind of I don't know, you're just asking the AI tool to tell you how it can help you better. In some ways, it's kind of simple, but it makes sense.
Right.
Hey, what can you do for me? How can you help me?
Yeah, and I just, I see it across the board around AI. I'll frequently be stuck on a task, and I'll just, I'm trying to write something usually, and I'm really stuck, and God, I don't want to go back and look that up again, and figure out how to say this. And then I'll say to myself, how could I use AI to help me with this? And that gets me unstuck and gets me on a path to resolving whatever the challenge is. And that's the glory of this, is that it's a breakthrough technology that helps individuals break through, as well as creating fantastic new things.
Well, Brent, I love that perspective and the optimism that it gives to all of us, and especially maybe the younger generation that's contemplating their future. I think is an important element of this conversation. I want to see if there's a way to sort of bring some of that optimism into the policy discussions that are happening around this issue right now, and start off with this broad question of, of course, with any new emerging technology, there's, as you mentioned, there's some fear, there's some uncertainty, there's some excitement about the potential, but that also prompts a lot of conversation around the potential for government regulation. So the first broad question is, in your view, is there a role for government regulation in the world of AI at all, or especially with respect to work and workforce issues? And if so, what should it look like in the proper way?
Okay, it's a really good question, and of course, this is occupying. I'm not an expert on regulation, but it's occupying the minds of a bunch of people in AEI and tens of thousands of people around the world who are actively working on this regulatory question. I've sort of borrowed from another AEI scholar, Yuval Levine, who's an expert on constitutional questions and the way government interacts with society. And what he said was, we have an extensive regulatory infrastructure in our state, federal, and local governments. There is no shortage of opportunities for government to regulate if it needs to regulate. And that's the big underlying question, is how much risk are we willing to take before we pass new regulation. Right now, if AI is involved in creating a new drug or a medical device, that all goes through the Food and Drug Administration. If it begins to impact the finance sector, Department of Treasury is going to get involved. There's just, for every potential application of AI, we probably have a government agency at the federal level that's responsible for that area of regulation. So let's start there. It does not make sense, in my view, except for a few kind of existential risks. Like, we got to figure out, like, how do we prevent people from using this to build weapons of mass destruction, or some other catastrophic risks that need to be thought about, and there are people that are thinking about it. But for lesser challenges, non-existential risks, we already have a regulatory infrastructure. We have courts that people can bring suit in if they feel they've been harmed. And that's the way that we need to regulate, is on actual harm rather than projected, anticipated, in your wildest dreams kind of, harms that could occur. It doesn't make sense to try to regulate preemptively. We need to allow our existing mechanisms to do their work. Then when something comes along, oh, we didn't think about that, we've never had to regulate this before, then Congress can act to expand existing authority, create a new agency, whatever it is that is deemed necessary. But we shouldn't try to anticipate where this is going to go. And the reason we shouldn't try to anticipate it too much is that for every time we regulate, we can see the harm that we're trying to avoid, or the harm that we've experienced that we want to avoid in the future. What we can't see is what we're giving up as a result of the regulation. The diseases that we won't be able to cure, the prosperity that we will deny ourselves by overregulating. Those are all the dogs that aren't barking, but they're out there, and they could potentially have a huge effect on our well-being, the well-being of future generations.
Brent, there's one example that comes to mind, and again, I think this framework you're outlining of, again, clear-eyed to their disruptive innovation is innovative, but also obviously by definition it can be disruptive. But there's an optimism and kind of almost a caution to folks in government at the state or federal level to say, watchful waiting. Like let's not get overzealous, right?
Right, and don't be so afraid. This. There's something in us as human beings that focuses on danger. When we were evolving on the savannas of Africa as a species, we had to really be watchful. Right? Is that a rock over there? Is it a lion? And that fear is a survival mechanism for us, right? And that's why it's there. It's there to protect us. We are not living on the savannah. We are at the bleeding edge of the best that human beings have ever experienced in the history of the planet. Our fear levels should be going down. Human beings don't change very fast, right? So we have to actively push against that instinct, I think, in order to really adapt ourselves to actual circumstances rather than the ones that exist in our heads.
Well, let's talk about one of those actual circumstances, because this has come up in recent years as an example of this debate. And I've heard just over the years some folks talking about the trucking industry in particular, because we think of, one of the advents of AI is autonomous driving. We've all, seen Teslas more and more driving around. There's other car brands that are embracing that. I see on social media every now and then autonomous taxis or Uber style cars where you could get in and there's not a human driver. And so a lot of important questions around the advent of that technology. But in particular, a couple of years ago, the Teamsters Union actually put out a kind of policy framework for federal policymakers on the use of autonomous technology in the trucking industry. And they specifically called for essentially laws mandating that a human driver would be in the truck regardless, which I'm not an expert on trucking, obviously, but in my mind, that kind of neutralizes the point and the value out of AI. But one of the concerns articulated there is that the trucking industry, it is a big industry here in Utah. It's a huge source of employment for many, many Americans across the country. And there has kind of, in some sectors, been a little bit of an instinct to stop AI or to slow it somehow with the goal of trying to protect these jobs that human drivers have. So that's kind of a real world example. How would you respond to some of those concerns? What would be the right approach?
Okay, so wait till we get to automated airplanes. Where you no longer have a pilot in the cabin. You just have AI connected to satellites. It's piloting you on your trip to Orlando. So these are, again, this will makes the hair stand up when you think about that, because it feels so like, this is it all sounds like a plot to a Hollywood movie. It's all the Terminator. We've been kind of weaned on this fear of advancing technology. Autonomous driving and truck drivers. When I first started at AEI 7 years ago, people were convinced that autonomous truck driving was imminent and that all these jobs were going to go away as a result. That hasn't happened. It is actually a far more complex task for AI than was generally recognized, I think, then. That doesn't mean it isn't going to happen. It just means that this is going to be more gradual, I think. I read recently that I can't remember which company it is, but they've opened up autonomous trucking on one freeway in Texas, between San Antonio and Dallas, I think, or something like that. Something that, it's very straight, very flat. Um, and that's the way that this is going to progress, is that we're going to try it. We're going to figure out what the problems are, improve, try it again, improve, try it again. So you're talking about a transition. It's very capital intensive to do this. It takes a lot of money. Basically, not as expensive as paying human beings to do the work. That's why we're going to transition, is that we don't have to pay so much for the human skill that's required. So, autonomous driving stuff. I don't know if you've been to San Francisco recently. I took one of the Waymo cabs a few months ago. Fantastic. It was astonishing how good it was. And I don't think we want to deprive ourselves of that, So that, to get to the underlying question, what about the people who are currently doing these jobs? And what we need to guard against is something that in economics is called the lump of labor fallacy. The lump of labor fallacy says there's only a certain amount of work to be done. And if machines are doing more of it, that means necessarily humans are going to be doing less. That has not been the pattern of automation throughout history. Automation frees resources up, allows people to do more, to create new products, new services, and the number of jobs continue to grow. I'm convinced that our biggest problem is not that AI is going to take all the jobs away. It's going to be a question of whether we can automate fast enough to keep up with a population which is declining relative to the size of the economy. In absolute numbers, we keep growing, of course, but we aren't adding enough workers to keep up, to maintain economic growth. We have to have more workers, and we don't have them. So if we don't have them, then we're going to have to substitute technology for some of that. But there, I mean, I could be wrong. We may arrive at a workless future, or a future in which people are really free to work a lot less and to devote more of their lives to their families and their non-work, aspects of their lives. And I'm not so sure that would be a bad thing if it happened. Nonetheless, as I said, in the short term, we have to figure out, as employment opportunities for truckers in this case, or more recently and more profoundly, people who code for a living, the people who brought us this technology are on the front end of the automation problem. We have to figure out what we're going to do for them. How are we going to support them in the transition? We do not want to relive what happened in the 1990s and early 2000s when automation came in and basically took away millions of manufacturing jobs in a relatively short period of time. We don't want it, and we didn't have the kinds of supports that we needed under those workers. We need to not do that again. That's something that is avoidable, that we could do a lot better on. I've been thinking through a few ideas around that. There are models available to us that could help us, do better at it. But those truckers need to know that if and when there's no longer a job for them in trucking, that they're going to have the resources that they need to transition to a new job. It can take a lot of different forms. It could take, a training voucher to allow them to gain a new skill. It could be relocation to a place where they still need truck drivers. It could be it could be any number of it could be wage insurance. For instance, okay, I was a trucker, I'm making $80,000 a year. Now my new job is only paying $60,000. Government replaces a portion of that wage so that you're not out the full 20. Maybe you're out 10 or 15, but there are shock absorbers that we can deploy to help people in that transition. And so that's where I think the truckers and other people who are fearful about automation have a point, a really important point, that they don't want to be left out in the cold if this amazing new technology de-skills the task that they were doing. And there's going to be a lot of that. It's going to be, I think, mainly focused in the knowledge sector, knowledge and information. Workers who are doing billing, coding for medical stuff, or making appointments for doctors, or, anything that requires kind of easily replicable tasks that are not unlike being an auto worker on a manufacturing line, except that you're doing it in your head instead of with your hands. Those kinds of things are going to get automated. My own view is that for people in those jobs now, they need to be thinking, am I in the top 10% of people who do this work? If I am, no problem. Your job will change. It will become supervising the automated processes and devices that are doing the work that you used to do. For people who are not in that top 10%, they need to think about reskilling. They need to think about, and we need to do a better job of providing information about what these jobs of the future are supposed to be, because we don't really have any idea right now. But for incumbent workers, you need to be thinking about, do I move up to a new set of tasks related to what I used to do, or am I going to have to find something else? If I think I'm going to have to find something else because I'm okay, I'm good at what I do, but I'm not great, then it's a matter of retraining.
A lot of the sprint seems to really center on this question of skills and the skills that individual workers possess. There's another piece that you wrote for the AEI blog that I want to read an excerpt from. And it really, in my mind, at least kind of starts to get at the issue of soft skills. I think non-cognitive skills is what you've called it in some of your work. But here's an excerpt from your piece. You write, as opposed to coming from formal credentials, strong leadership springs from behavioral patterns that foster collaboration, a type of socio-emotional IQ called non-cognitive skills. You go on to write, use of AI may afford opportunities for more people of all backgrounds to discover and develop leadership abilities. Moreover, the emerging reality that AI will increasingly take over narrow technical tasks is likely to raise the premium on social emotional skills. A world that demands more of such skills may disproportionately benefit the socially agile relative to the technically gifted. Brent, the thing that stands out to me from that is again, sort of this question of soft skills versus technical skills. And I know sometimes those terms are a little bit imprecise, but the analogy that comes to mind, or the example that comes to mind rather, in previous work, I worked for a couple different chambers of commerce here in Utah. So just enmeshed in the private sector and then the needs of employers. One of the things that I heard over and over again was employers, they would say, look, we know how to teach people technical skills. Again, driving a truck, we'll just stick with that example. They say, we can hire you out of high school. We can teach you how to drive a truck. But I also heard employers say, I don't know as well how to teach someone how to get along with their boss, how to have good time management skills, kind of, again, these non-cognitive soft skills, for lack of a better term. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has even put out research and recommendations on addressing the soft skills gap. Is AI something that can help address this issue area that currently employers are still struggling with?
If you'd asked me that question 7 years ago, I would have probably laughed in your face for asking that question, because of course, if you want to learn how to be a good person, you need another person to show you, right? Non-cognitive skills develop very, very early. First 5 years of life is when we experience that most of that development, and then they are honed and improved over time, and everybody's involved, schools and community organizations and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and all. There's a reason that we have all of these civil society institutions, because they really help create good human beings. That's why they exist. We need socialization. Okay. So what possible use could AI be if we require the support of other people to acquire these skills? It has shocked me profoundly what I've seen in terms of the research showing how AI is able to impart these human skills. In fact, I had a meeting with somebody at Google not too long ago, and this person is involved in AI-based training, and she said, she brought it up. I did not bring it up. The ultimate irony here, she said, is that AI may end up making us better people. And you can see it in the research that people who struggle with reading and understanding social cues, people with autism, people who have experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, they can gain immensely from the interaction with the AI. Now, why is that? Because the AI is just us, right? It's built on human experience. And in terms of coaching and mentoring and things like that really help us develop these non-cognitive skills, they never get tired and they never get frustrated. AI just doesn't do that. So you can make the same mistake over and over and over again until you learn. And AIs can coach people through that process. So we're seeing it in a number of different areas. I'm very optimistic and hopeful about this, because it's my central concern, is that what's really holding back the most disadvantaged people in our country are soft skills deficits. And this is the first time that we've ever seen anything that was capable of transferring that kind of knowledge, what we call tacit knowledge, between people. It's always been kind of an apprenticeship process. But now we've got a resource that can follow the person, talk with them, help them. AI therapy is becoming a big deal because unlike a human psychotherapist, it's not going to get frustrated. It's not going to get tired. It's going to give you better advice probably than you would get from a person. So, not a rap on therapists, not a rap on any human being, because as I said, AI is just us. That's why it works, because it's built on us. But this is a force multiplier across the board for human development.
Brent, the last kind of substantive question I want to ask, and then we'll wrap up because we're about at time. But I love this conversation because it touches on work and opportunity and upward mobility and skill development and technology and innovation, and it threads together a lot of important things that, in my view, are kind of at the heart of what America is about. American dynamism is all these things, work and innovation, and taking human beings to the next level. So I love the way you're approaching it. Kind of the last substantive question, when we think about workforce development programs in particular, and a lot of your work is, again, as you focused on kind of dislocated, disconnected populations in some form, a lot of the work that I'm involved in here at Sutherland Institute, kind of wearing my senior fellow hat, is poverty and upward mobility. Right now we're looking a lot at social safety net reform, but also workforce issues and how to, again, help these families in Utah and across America better connect to the skills they need to be able to plug into the amazing blessings of the free enterprise system. And workforce development programs for these kinds of populations, sometimes that's a tough nut to crack as well, just because there's one, like, how do you get people to want to participate? How do you get the right outcomes? And there are ongoing discussions over the years, back when I worked at the county level and we talked about this, and in various roles, where almost this question of, well, how do we get workforce development right to really help lower income populations, maybe that typically have fewer skill sets that are in high demand in the labor force. How do we get these programs right to imbue these folks with the skills that can help them provide for their families and live the American dream? Can AI help us be better at doing that?
Yeah, I think it can, and I think there will be some surprises relative to AI as workforce development. One of which is the soft skills thing. One thing we know about our workforce programs is that they don't work very well, or at least they don't deliver to us the kind of results that we would like to see. That's partly a function of we don't spend very much on workforce in this country. We're the only country that in the OECD that spends less than we do is Japan, as a percentage of gross national product or gross domestic product. So we don't. It's a little unclear whether we have not good results because the programs don't work or we're funding them at a level where they can't work. AI again can act as a force multiplier for the workforce system. Not everybody needs to meet with a human case manager. And if they don't have to, we can reserve those resources for the people who need them the most and let the others interact with a technology that is attuned to them, their needs, their interests, and is thinking creatively alongside them about the future of their work. Now, all of that is premised on the idea that people have the internal motivation to want that. And I think especially they want it and they have the capacity to do it. I think that in a low unemployment environment like we've had for the last several years, if you're not in the workforce, you've probably got a pretty good reason for it right now. There's some sort of barrier that's keeping you out, physical, emotional, substance abuse, whatever it is. And you're not going to get people into the workforce unless you can address those needs and get at this non-cognitive and soft skills issue. And I think that AI can be helpful to people who are motivated, don't have too many barriers, and then we can use our public resources to help those who have additional barriers standing between them and opportunity. But I keep going back to this. Nobody can do this for you. Not just AI. Nobody can do life for you. You've got to do life for yourself with help from others, no doubt. But you have to every individual has to take responsibility here. To learn AI, to have a vision for their future. What do they want? This is the plague that I see, is that people don't, they've been told that we've got one standard for success, and that's making a lot of money. And until people step back and ask, who am I? How am I built? What is my contribution to the world? As the starting point, all the programs in the world, AI is not going to make the difference.
Brent, my last question that might kind of tie into everything you were just saying, kind of again, this aspirational vision, just the last question to wrap things up. I want to do sort of a modified version of my elevator question where you're on an elevator and in walks the president and congressional leadership. Right behind them, Utah's governor and our legislative leadership, and a person who represents the average worker in America. This is a very large elevator, obviously, for all these folks to fit on their way.
It's a freight elevator. It's a freight elevator, right? Yeah.
And they all see you and say, "Hey, you're Brent Orrell from AEI. You've done great work on AI. What should we do about it, Brent? With this, it's interesting. It's exciting. There's a little bit of uncertainty at the federal level, the state level, and the worker level. What's the one big thing you would really want them to remember and take away from this conversation?"
I would want them to understand that workforce development is a life cycle proposition. And when it comes to AI, it's just as true there as it is in any other domain. Okay, so becoming a good worker is something that starts when you're born, proceeds through K through 12 education, and then some sort of post-secondary credential, And we need to be busy helping people at every one of those segments, right? For AI, we need AI literacy starting probably in kindergarten. And then it needs, as people advance in their education and age, they need to see it. They need to see how AI is impacting every kind of subject matter area, right? So if your passion is history, what does AI mean for the study of history? If your passion is engineering, how is AI reshaping engineering? But so it needs to be integrated into all the courses rather than as a standalone kind of, oh yeah, like taking typing class in high school. That's really dating myself, but you know, so for our workers coming up, I think that's my answer, is focus on AI literacy. For incumbent workers, businesses really need to invest their more than their money. They need to invest their time and their thought in, how do I leverage this technology to do more, to expand my business, to, all of those things, and then ask, do I have the workforce that I need? And if I don't have the workforce that I need, it's probably not a good idea to think that I'm just going to go out into the job market and just find the unicorns that I need to make this happen. Much better to think about your incumbent workforce and get them trained up for what you need them to do. That's where you get the real productivity improvement that all employers want to see. And I see it happening. Businesses saying, we may not be hiring as much, but we are not firing people. What we're doing is we're reskilling the people that we have to use the AI systems. And now, again, there are examples of people losing their jobs because of AI. And that's part of the normal churn of the economy. I think we lose about 5 million jobs a month in the United States are gone, and another 5 million or 6 million are created. So that's just part of the normal course of business.
Well, Brent, we will leave it there just due to time. Would love to have you back. This is exciting stuff. That the industry, or the world of AI is changing rapidly. But again, what stands out to me is this message of, we want to be honest about some of the disruptive effects, but overall on net, this is going to be a great thing for humanity. And if we approach it the right way now, to leverage it in our own lives and our work, and for the further flourishing of mankind, it'll be great.
And we have an opportunity to shape it. And that's really important. We are not going to be victims of this. We're going to actively shape it, make it serve us, rather than just be replaced by it.
Well, we appreciate your time, and thank you again. We'll link to some of your work in our show notes, and would love to have you on again. Just really appreciate your time here on Defending Ideas.
Anytime. Happy to do it.
Once again, folks, that's Brent Orrell, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. We're going to take a quick break before we leave you with some final thoughts. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Throughout history, anytime new technology has changed the way we work, engage in commerce, or interact with one another, it obviously can bring some uncertainty and can have disruptive effects. But it can also usher in new ways for humans to be productive, to innovate, to solve problems, and ultimately to flourish. Think of things like cars, electricity, the internet. Today we see all the ways that these innovations have improved our lives. So the key takeaway to me from our conversation with Brent today is this. Of course, we should be clear-eyed and honest about effects of AI on different sectors of our economy and on specific jobs. But the answer is to work harder on solutions that help people upskill and take advantage of new opportunities that a 21st century economy will bring, rather than giving in to an understandable instinct to at times try and just stop technological innovation. And for you and I, we should be actively learning how this new technology can improve the way we work and the way we live our lives generally, so that we can be on the cutting edge as well. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. And don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas. From the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City, I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.